So now I want to, thanks again, you guys. I just want to, our whole lives, my life, you've seen in the book where I wrote about, it's from 17 to 70. I was there. But here's a guy that was even there the whole time. So Chris Bach, if you a lot of you know him, a lot of you don't. But if you don't know him, his legacy is always about making things authentic, keeping the dream alive. He's the guy that, I guess in a better way to explain it, if you were going to buy from an art dealer a Mona Lisa, because they told you it was the real thing, you would sometimes get a hold of Chris, and Chris would look it over very carefully, and he would walk out of that room and say, yeah, it's authentic. He doesn't say much, he listens. But today he's so gracious to come out and spend time with us, because Chris he's everything and then some. And you'll never really see Chris at Pebble Beach. He is the maven of that whole thing. But you could actually ask him that. He's, oh, no, that's not. But that's Chris Bach. And Chris, I would like to introduce you to the world, and I do say world renowned, because Pebble Beach is world renowned, to the head judge that has made that show what it is today. Authenticity, and reliability. Here's Chris Bach, the one and only.
I think I should have left last night. I was reading in the magazine that we all got in our packets. Robert was saying that a 1941 Packard started it all for him some years ago. And I have to tell you that I also have a 1941 Packard that started it all. And if I may, I grew up in Berkeley, California, back when it was a Midwestern college town. Had a Packard dealer, lots of interesting old cars. And because I was a fairly straightforward young person, I was made a junior traffic officer when I was in the 5th and 6th grade. And I would go down to my corner with my red stop sign and a little uniform, and it happened, there was a lovely house on that corner, and the woman who owned that house had a driver, and she had a 1941 Packard 180 sedan. And while I was there escorting the little moppets across the street, the driver would take the Packard out of the garage and he'd bring it around and put it in front of the house and line up the back door with the front walk and the whole 9 yards. And then pretty soon out would come Miss Towell, who turned out to be the Dean of Women at Berkeley, and get in the car, and he would drive her a mile to the university, and she would arrive in style. But I was fascinated by that car, and goofy little thing I remember is, depending on the weather, he would adjust the back windows in that car, because it had controls on top of the dashboard for those ridiculous hydraulic windows, power windows, and he could lower the back windows sitting in the front, and I thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. But anyway, that was my introduction to a Packard, and it was a 1941 Packard. And fast forward 7 or 8 years or whatever, and that car came up for sale. And I went and looked at it, and unfortunately it had lost its spot in the garage, and it was sitting out, and one thing led to another, and my father suggested that I should find somebody to check it out for me before I spent $125 to buy it. And so that led me to find the Packard Club, and it led me to find the Classic Car Club. And I joined both, and I didn't buy the car on advice of the person who checked it out. Probably the best decision I ever made. But anyway, that started me into the auto hobby at age 17, 18. And in 1963, I joined a group, and we went down to the Pebble Beach Concours. and arrived there, and it was a magic weekend, and it was a magic show. I met Phil Hill, I met J.B. Nethercutt and Dorothy, Roger Morrison, who I think some of you know was active here in this club, and a whole wonderful group of people. And I was embraced into that hobby at a very early age, and it stuck. And I've gone to Pebble Beach every year since. This will be my 60th year, and eventually moved to the Monterey Peninsula and became more deeply involved in the show, and started as a judge and then got involved in other facets of it. But that's how I got into the auto hobby, through a 1941 Packard. And I don't own that 41 Packard, but I finally bought its identical twin, so that's fun. But you know, the Monterey Peninsula is now Car Week. My God, you know, it's the mecca of the car world. It's gone from a one-day show, which started in 1950 as an adjunct to road races, and has grown to just this crazy proportion of a week. The interest in automobiles on the Monterey Peninsula started early on. The old Del Monte Hotel in Monterey had a horse track, and starting in 1905, they did auto races on that dirt horse track. And some prominent folks, you ever heard of George Whittle? Largest purchaser of J. Duesenbergs in the history, owned a great deal of the eastern shore of Lake Tahoe, and he bought a 1905 Moors and had it imported just to drive in those road races. And those went on for a while, then they had a nasty accident and it all went away. After the Second World War, road races came to the streets of Pebble Beach within the Del Monte Forest, and they were very successful and very popular. And it was in 1950 that the Concord was born as an adjunct to those road races, and it grew from there. And it was initially a group of relative to this book and the auto dealers, where auto dealers would bring new cars to show them. You had a field full of MGs and Jaguars and so forth, and one or two collector cars. And then by 1955, there were more collector cars, and somebody we all knew and loved, Phil Hill, restored his aunt's 1931 Pierce Arrow, and did a beautiful job, and brought that to Pebble Beach and entered it in the Concours, and won Best of Show. And that was the first vintage automobile to win the Pebble Beach Concours. He just happened to win his class in the road race in a Jaguar the same year. So all the pictures of him receiving a trophy for this beautiful car, he's covered in oil and grease, and it's a great shot. But Phil was a remarkable part of the hobby. Through the years, the new car dealers went away. There was a 1956 Packard Caribbean on the field in 1956, a new car entry, and I always wanted to see us get another one on the field, which we did finally a few years ago in a class of 50s convertibles. But what was happening is that the hobby was growing in sophistication, and that show was growing in sophistication, and two people are probably the most responsible for the evolution of authenticity and originality in that show, and they were J.B. Nethercutt and Bill Harrah. And they both were building incredible collections, and they were both historians, and they were detail-oriented and research-oriented, and they had kind of an unmentioned competition to see who could win Best of Show the most times. And JB actually won that competition. He won 6 times, Bill Harrah won 5 times, but in the process, they set a standard which became the benchmark for how you restore a car, and built these libraries and hired technicians and found people that could do the work in the old ways when the cars were built new. You know, Phil Hill emerges again when he went in partnership with Ken Vaughn with a restoration shop in Santa Monica, I believe, called Hill and Vaughn, and they did just incredible work, Packards and other cars. And again, they kept elevating the standards. And you know, what we saw through the years was that the entries that would come to Pebble Beach year after year, and they were driver quality automobiles for the most part. And the attention to authenticity and originality was not good in the beginning, and it gradually, you know, the world changed. In the mid-70s, Lauren Tryon and Jay Human were asked to take over that show, and they were responsible for really elevating the standards. They put in a rule that no car could come back for 10 years, so that the field was fresh each year, and they established judging procedures which really involved experts in the various fields. Packards became judged by Packard people, antiques by antique people, Duesenbergs by Duesenberg people. So the whole show elevated. And in the process, that kind of oozed out into the hobby. And you saw people spending more and more time on research and exploring the provenance of their car and so forth, so that when the car came on the field, it was beautifully prepared and it was authentically prepared. And cars that did not have that work done didn't fare very well. And eventually the judging process at Pebble Beach embraced what is called the elegance factor. We use a 100-point scoring sheet at Pebble Beach. And, you know, frankly, the quality of the cars is such that you can have a class where you'll have 300-point cars. And, you know, what do you do? To get a dartboard or something? So, anyway, a 3 points elegance factor or presence factor was added to the judging form, which allowed the judges to make a subjective analysis of the car. And we tell them, you know, if there's a car that kind of speaks to you, this car is done so appropriately, the colors are appropriate, the accessories are appropriate, you know, reward that car. That's where you use your 3 points, and that becomes the tiebreaker so often. So, through the years, this has allowed us to elevate the judging and the cars, and the hobby has trailed along. And, you know, gone are the days, frankly, when cars painted inappropriate modern colors could do well. People, you know, there's so much information out there now. The original color books from the 20s are available, the original manufacturers of the paint and so forth. And so you'll see cars that are done with just these incredible subtle colors from the 20s, the early 30s, the use of appropriate two-tones. And, you know, it's just been a wonderful evolution, you know. You used to see cars, you know, with 3 spotlights and 2 road lights and 4 horns and all these gaudy accessories, and all gone, all gone. So, you know, we appreciate that, and we're glad that we were able, in some little way, to be part of the hobby evolving in that way. You know, the other thing that's fascinating, and it's borne out now by auction results, which is an interesting bellwether for car values. You know, some of them are hard to fathom, but cars where the history and the provenance of the car is known and provable will bring top dollar in a concours. And if a car has suddenly appeared out of nowhere with no information on where it's been, there's a car out here in the parking lot that's a perfect example from General Lyon's collection. It's a Packard 34 LeBaron Speedster. It's one of 4 real 1934 Packard LeBaron Speedsters, and it's a priceless car. And yet there's probably a dozen of them out there that were beautifully created by Fran Roxas in the 80s and other people. And, you know, the hobby is so sophisticated now, and the auction business and the buyers are so sophisticated now, that those cars, you know, bring a fraction of what a real car will bring. And one of the things that we did at Pebble Beach was institute a 15-person selection committee to review every entry that comes in for qualifying to be on the field in the show. And we go back and we ask for photographs to prove the provenance of the car, so that we make sure that we aren't, and no discredit to Fran Roxas, he did beautiful work, but we don't want to put a Fran Roxas car in the field. We want to put General Lyon's car on the field because Packard built it in 1934, not Fran Roxas in 1984. So, you know, these are things which have come into the hobby and become important. And, you know, I would encourage you, these gentlemen that have the book are incredible, but you can all be amateur historians. You all own cars, and I don't know how many of you have done it, but it is really an interesting thing to go back now and try and trace the lineage of your car. And in some cases, you can go all the way back to original delivery documents and so forth. And it's really a fun hunt, if you will, to do that. And there are people who now have a career in doing that work for people. In other words, there's a wonderful young guy in North Carolina named Jonathan Sierakowski, and that's all he does. And there are people who will not buy a major vehicle without having him research its history. He sent me a report he did on a Packard, and it was a beautiful Dietrich Sport Fan, dual windshield, V windshield, ticked all the boxes, and the car had been around the hobby for years, and no one had really restored it, and it had a cloud hanging over it because it had been a major accident, and people weren't sure it was real. And a gentleman hired Mr. Sierakowski to trace the car, and he did, and it was fascinating. And he sent me a copy of the report. He traced the car back to the late 1930s out in Nevada, and found pictures of it the day of the accident, which called the car into question, and then had pictures of the car after that. In other words, he built the whole story, and he took the cloud off the car. The car was now accepted as what it was. It was beautifully restored. It came to Pebble Beach, and the owner loves it. But you can do the same thing for your own car. I bought a 56 Packard Patrician with 4,600 miles on it. And everybody said, oh no, it's 104,600 or whatever, and I didn't believe it. And starting with a lube sticker on the door, car was sold new in Spokane, I found the second owner of the car who serviced it for the original owner, owned a gas station, still living in Spokane. Found a picture of the original owner on the internet, found a picture of the dealership building on the internet, and got the whole story and verified the history of the car and why it had no miles, and it was just a lot of fun to do it, and it enhanced the value of the car. The car deserved to have the story straight, and we can all do that to our cars. So anyway, I think in addition to originality and authenticity, we can add provenance to one of the things we want to study on our cars. But anyway, it's fun to talk to you. The only thing I'd like to leave you with is when I was 17 years old and I walked up to a group of Packard owners, I was embraced and brought into the fold. And that was 60 years ago. I've been doing it ever since. And we should all pay attention to the young folks out there when they come to look at our cars and not be dismissive and think that, they couldn't appreciate what we're doing, because they're going to be the people who are going to be doing Robert's work and everybody else's work in the next generation. So anyway, I appreciate being here. I hope I haven't rambled around too much, but if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them now or later or whenever, and it's an honor to be here. Been coming to the PI meets since God knows when. And I enjoyed it all very much, and I thank you.
So, this is your opportunity, okay? Chris, if there's any questions you have, please feel free to ask. Larry, keep your hand down. But I thoroughly appreciate you being here on this day.
Can I dispel a myth?
Okay.
Okay. Some people think you have to be invited to show a car at the Pebble Beach Concours, and that is not true. Anyone sitting in this room can contact the Pebble Beach Concours or go on their website and fill out an entry form, and it will be given due consideration. And there is no entry fee. So, come on down. But we only have room for 200 cars, and we get about 1,000 entries.
So those of you who have not been to Pebble Beach, it is magical. A lot of you have been there, but the minute that you step into that town, and I got to tell you, it's magical. There's been times where I couldn't get Gigi off of a chair because Clint Eastwood was in the bar, and she kept sending him drinks. I said, Gigi, but there, it's just fun. It's different. As Chris has said, it is magical. For 60 years, he has helped guide the automobile hobby. And I say stuff that he wouldn't say, but the auction houses owe you a lot of credit because you have helped make their footprint a $1 billion example, because they're proud to tell you they have sold $25 million worth of cars, $35 million worth of cars, $100 million worth of cars. But the people buying the cars are buying them because they want them for their collection. And these are smart people who now buying buildings. And we took you on a tour yesterday.